If you're a fan of combat, then you definitely know my next guest. Former co-host of Fight Quest on the Discovery Channel, former host of American Warrior, commentator for Premier Boxing Champions, Bellator MMA, and now the UFC, combat veteran of all types and disciplines, black belt, Jimmy Smith. Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
It's exciting for me, Jimmy, because I've watched you for a long, long time. And with the Fight Quest, I thought that was one of the greatest shows. You know, I mean, it really gave you an inside look to what the training and the fighting was like with some really extreme fighting styles and very serious individuals.
Yeah. I mean, it was an experience from the beginning, man. Not just the styles, but the training and the people and the culture we were in, and having to film and train at the same time. It was trial by fire at the time, man.
Definitely, and we'll go back real quick and just say, in high school, wrestling was your base, and you fell in love with jiu-jitsu. How did that happen? I know you were exposed in high school. What was the story behind that?
Well, what happened was I was a wrestler in high school, and so I went to UCLA, and they don't have a wrestling team. They have a wrestling club because they don't have an actual wrestling team. And so I'm up there with the wrestling club one day, and I'm wrestling these guys, and this coach comes in, and he goes, "I'm a jiu-jitsu instructor, and I teach a jiu-jitsu class here at UCLA. Tonight, you look like a good wrestler. You should come check it out." And I went, "What are you talking about?" I had no idea what it was at the time. And I remember this is 1998 or something. And anyway, so I went in there, and I just used wrestling moves until they hurt the first time I did it, and I loved it immediately. I thought it was awesome, and I started going to classes there. And then when I graduated in 2000, I was driving through Huntington Beach, and I saw a sign that said jiu-jitsu, and I said, I should try this out. And I pulled over, and it turned out to be Team Punishment, or what eventually became Team Punishment. Tito Ortiz and all those guys were training out of this place. And that's where I got my start, man. Stayed with them. That's where I had my first fight.
And it's amazing. Did you ever think back then, I mean, it's got to be impossible to think back then that you could have just defied odds, I mean, to get to where you're at now? Because you have, like we said with Fight Quest, I mean, you were fighting all styles, all disciplines, professional MMA fighter, 5-1. I believe you had 4 submissions, so that black belt was shining. But did you ever picture yourself getting to the place you're at now, doing the commentary for the UFC?
No, I mean, what you have to understand is that I got into MMA so early. I think my first fight was 2000 or 2001. This didn't exist. Like, I got into so early that, did you think you'd get here? There was no here. Like, you couldn't really make a career out of it. I think Mark Kerr said one time, who was like, the biggest back, in 2099. I think he made $2 million his whole career. And, like, at the time, that was, that was as good as it got. I mean, he was huge at the time. So when people say, do you realize you'd get this far? Well, there was nowhere really at the time to go. I didn't think I'd get far because nobody made millions doing the sport. Nobody got huge endorsements. Nobody was that big. So I've been able to kind of see everything grow, and I've kind of kept up with it, really, rather than like, oh, I'm going to get there. There was no finish line. We had no idea. So it was just mentally a different place to be when I started than is even possible now.
And the thing for me, and you're exactly right, because when you go back to basically the beginning of MMA, now I come from the boxing background. And with boxing, we know we had so many different, champions and different organizations. It was crazy. So the second that I was exposed to MMA, I was just blown away. I mean, it was incredible. And it has blown up. And, a lot of people say, well, it's been a while. It has. I mean, considering where MMA is at today, it is just blown up. It is the fastest growing combat sport in history. And, I mean, you were just at the 222 UFC, big event. I mean, we had some crazy fights on there. And it's all over. I mean, the UFC has gone global. They've been in so many different countries. They've done an incredible job. And you're right, you could never predict that the sport could have taken you here.
No, I had no idea at the time. I mean, my first fight, I think I made $150, and then my last one, I made $1,200. It was just, that's what you got paid back then. Like, I mean, if that, I mean, you never knew, and so guys had to sell a lot of tickets to break even, and there were shows all over the place, and everything was it was the Wild West. I mean, you weighed in on bathroom scales in the hotel lobby and stuff, and it was just a different world, So not even people today talk about the scale of MMA, and it took 20 minutes to explain to people what you did. I mean, they didn't even know what you were talking about. So, it's come a long way. It's come very, very far, and I'm lucky to still be with it.
I remember I had a conversation with a couple guys that were back in the old school. It was pretty funny. And Mark Coleman told me, and he was cornering a friend of his that was going to fight Vanderlei Silva. And they walked by and they seen Vanderlei greasing up because he was going against a wrestler. And he says, "What are you doing?" And Vanderlei looked at him and said, "This is a fight game. It's a fight game." And that's the way it was. Now, it's come so far. And we're seeing, for me, the big thing, Jimmy, is the evolution, how the fighters, the skill is just blowing up. I mean, you look at a guy like John Jones, who was training in MMA about 4 years or so, became the UFC champ, and now we have guys that train in MMA. They don't come just from a wrestling background or a karate background. And it's become mainstream. Now, I've got to say, wrestling, though, Jimmy, is this the main base? Because when you control where the fight takes place, I mean, that's got to be the biggest discipline there is wrestling.
Yeah, but it's also, as far as sports go, and I've done a few of them, I don't think there's any that train as hard as wrestlers. Just the work ethic is ridiculous. And they start so young. I mean, I remember this montage before the NCAA championships a few years ago, and they asked them when they started, and they were saying, like, yeah, I took it really seriously when I was about 7, or like, I won my first national title when I was 6, and like, they start so young and they work so hard, and at the end they have, a college degree if you're lucky, So it was also the amount of time they had to put in and the effort they had to put in, the work ethic. Once they said, "Oh, I can make money doing something else," all that just transferred, and they just kept doing what they were doing. And that's why wrestlers, I think, made such a huge impact. Is if you've ever trained with a Division I wrestler, their work ethic is unbelievable. And once they put that toward MMA, they became kind of an unstoppable force in that regard. So not just did they technically have an advantage, in terms of their work ethic, their ability to train, their ability to cut weight, they were made for it.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Some of the toughest, mentally strong human beings come from that background. And, when you got guys that are cutting weight back then at that age, which I didn't really understand. I didn't realize that. I mean, I used to fight all the time. And I've lost more times than I could possibly tell you how many times I've lost. But the worst whooping I ever took was from a wrestler who took me down and pretzeled me up, and I had no control whatsoever. And that gave me a whole new respect for wrestling. But these guys were cutting weight, Jimmy, at that age, growing up cutting weight. And you can look at someone like, let's say, Gleison Tebow. You see Gleison when he's not in a camp, when he's just walking around, he looks like a bodybuilder. How he makes that weight, I have no idea.
Yeah, Douglas Lima walks around about, told me one time, like 210, makes 170 pounds, like he's a giant, you know. It's those. I remember the first guy really back in the day who was the same size as a modern mixed martial artist was Tito Ortiz. He was huge light heavyweight. They call it middleweight at the time, and he was so much bigger than everybody else. He'd been wrestling his whole life. So you know, he was. I mean, when you saw him take on Frank Shamrock, for example, he was just huge. He was twice his size, and so that was one of those techniques that certain guys had a really big advantage. And then after a while, it kind of filtered out as every team got its own wrestling staff, no wrestling coaches, all those kind of secret techniques, kind of everybody mastered them, and now everybody's big. But wrestlers really started it.
Well, a great example, I was with Ben Rothwell in Vegas. We were at the Invicta fights, and he seen Tito. He chased him down. We were sitting there talking with Tito was as big. I mean, first of all, he's got the biggest head. I was intimidated by the size of Tito's head alone. He was a great guy. But he was big, like, I mean, Ben is giant, 6'7" or something, 6'6", but Tito was huge. And for 205, I mean, it was shocking. And, you know, Tito Ortiz, for the people that like him, they don't like him, he really had a huge impact on the sport. His ground and pound was legendary. And you've got to respect those guys that made this sport. They brought it along with them. Let's say their personalities, with Tito especially, you know, that brought a lot of fans to the sport. And what you see now, or what I see, is it's evolved so far. These guys are making big money, which brings a lot of the older guys back to get some of that money. And we've seen some crazy fights. I mean, we've seen, you know, guys that I thought weren't really relevant, and they came back and put on incredible fights. You know, these are athletes that are at the pinnacle as far as being in shape and taking care of yourself. All the experience that you have, Jimmy, in other disciplines and with Fight Quest and being exposed to elite fighters in all the disciplines, is MMA the hardest as far as training and getting in shape?
It's tough because there's so many things that you have to be ready for, that you have to do. In terms of, you know, boxing, you have two weapons, and training boxing sucks, and it's really terrible, and it's really hard on you. But basically, you throw a lot of punches, and you skip a lot of rope, and you move a lot. So it's more specific. The thing about MMA that's so maddening is you have to be ready for so many different things. So you're putting so much stress on your body, and the injuries we see before big fights, where, you know, they get the injury bug and two people, you know, leave a card or whatever, that hardly ever happens, even in other combat sports. It's just that because, you know, you could have everything going great, you fall for a stupid submission and you tweak your arm. Or you're doing great and everything's wonderful and you check a kick and it messes your knee up. You have to be ready for so much. And that's the hard part of MMA is if you get a boxer who's got really fast hands, you tie him up for a minute, make him carry your weight, he's going to run out of gas. He's not used to that. A wrestler, for example, can hold you forever, but the static versus dynamic, when he starts punching, a lot of times they run out of gas, and they're not used to that kind of movement. MMA, you have to be ready for everything all the time, and that's what makes the training so difficult, and I've done them all.
Yeah, you definitely have. I was watching some of the shows again, and I mean, it's just really, it's amazing that you did that. That was in real time. There's no trick photography, guys. That was the real deal. And when Jimmy was sick, he was sick, but he still was running.
Oh.
He was still training. You know, you brought something up about leg kicks. And I'm speaking of the evolution of the sport. The lower leg kick to the calf has become, it has to be, the most deadly weapon out there. I mean, you're seeing guys get hit with 1, 2, 3 shots, and they're really having a problem fighting. They can't put the weight on that leg. I allowed someone to leg kick me once. That's all it took. I thought I was tough. My whole life I thought I was tough, and I realized I'm not really that tough. My leg went dead. It wasn't that it hurt so much then. It just didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like you get cracked on the chin and you feel okay, but your body's not working right. That leg kick, though, exactly. Jimmy, is that the most devastating strike in combat right now today?
It's certainly the one that's coming up probably the fastest, the one that most people are using that they didn't use before. And the thing is, it's hard to toughen up that part of the leg. I mean, that's the hard part, is the thigh has some meat to it. Other parts of your body have enough meat to it that they can take something. Your lower leg doesn't have much to it. It has a shin bone and a calf. There's not a lot you can do to kind of toughen it up. That's the hard part of a shot like that. The liver shot is horrible. There's just not a lot you can do. It's a very sensitive organ. The liver doesn't toughen up easily. So, I mean, that's one of those things about that low leg kick is it's very hard to toughen your body up to take it. Taking them over and over just sucks. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. And everybody's figuring it out, and then someone will come up with some counter to it, and it starts all over again. That's how the sport evolves.
Yeah, and it's amazing. It really is amazing how quick. And you see that low leg kick, and it's working, and it's effective. All of a sudden, a lot of guys are using it, and it's devastating people. And I have to go back to Yoel Romero and that fight, when he went against Rockhold, and his leg was broken from that kick in the first round. Yet this 40-year-old freak of nature, the guy's amazing, and his build, his ability, his explosiveness, he fought through that. Now, I don't know many guys could fight through something like that, but that was an amazing fight. And speaking of, I've got to touch on a couple weight divisions, Jimmy. What do you see? The heavyweights are going. Arlovsky comes back. This is the guy that everybody thought was done. I mean, like many times. But yet, he continues to come back. And that fight against Struve, I thought he did a great job. He did what he needed to do, and he used wrestling. And that was something I think I wasn't expecting from Arlovsky.
Yeah, I mean, he's at the age where he's starting to realize you can't go trading punches with bigger, younger, faster, stronger guys. You just can't do that anymore. And one thing about that wrestling game, like Randy Couture was able to wrestle very, very late in his life because he had a style that, I can still Greco somebody. I don't have to be that fast. I don't have to be that explosive. I can just lock up with somebody and bring him down and not get the wear and tear. And Arlovsky, I think, is realizing having that in his arsenal, he doesn't have to trade punches anymore with these big guys like Stefan Struve or, Stipe Miocic, any up-and-coming guys. Not that Stipe Miocic is that young, but any of the up-and-coming guys, these heavyweights can hit, man. They can crack, and they're fast. They're athletic. Kane's a cardio machine. You don't want to trade with those guys. If you can slow them down somehow, make it about your top game and your control, it gets a lot easier on you. And Arlovsky's starting to figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. With all your experience, Jimmy, and all of the extremely bad positions that you've been in your career in combat, myself, listen, when I started to do the show, I realized in order for me to give respect to the fighters, I need to experience what they experience. I tried to cut weight. I was going to cut 15 pounds, rubber suit, pedaling the bike in the sauna. They knocked on the window. I went to walk out. I woke up looking at nose hole hairs.
Yeah.
I didn't make 15 pounds. And then the whole thing about, and I have a lot of guys that will say, they're against the fence and they're taking a break. Every muscle in my body was flexed in that wizard position to try to keep from being taken down. I was in a position that is the worst, which is so exhausted you can't defend yourself anymore. What is the worst experience that Jimmy Smith has ever been through in combat?
Wow. Well, I think the worst experience I've been through in combat, that's a tough one, because I've been through a few. What Well, when I got really sick was in Brazil doing Fight Quest. And what had happened was they had this shot of, they wanted to get a shot of me swimming somewhere. So, for some reason. So, they had me swim out on wherever I was near Ipanema Beach where you're not supposed to swim. Like, you're not supposed to swim there because it's toxic. And so they had me swim out there. And no one knew how bad it was. And I got sicker than I've ever been in my whole life that night. The sound guy actually got sick listening to me get sick. Like, he was holding his mic and he's like throwing up and all this stuff because I sounded so bad. Anyway, so my fight was like the next day I forget. The next day they took me to the hospital, and then I fought the day after that. So anyway, I was still really bad, obviously, and it was really hot. We were outside, and to get enough footage, we had to fight for like a half hour. It looks on tape like we fought like one match. We didn't fight one match. We fought like 3 or 4. Because they wanted enough footage to cut to make it, to make it look enough exciting footage to make a good fight. So this guy Igor Estrella, who now teaches up in the Bay, up in San Francisco, he has his own academy, was the guy I fought. It was amazing purple belt back then, and we fought for like a half hour. I remember I was dizzy and I was like out of it. I was so out of it they had just rehydrated me and I was sick and all this stuff, and that was pretty bad. I remember feeling pretty terrible during that fight. Also in Japan, during the Kumite at the end, I had to fight 5 guys at once. And so there's that idea, not at once, 5 guys in a row. And so there's that idea, if you just finished a fight, you can't relax. You got to fight somebody else who was bigger than the last guy. So that being halfway through like an ordeal like that was always tough. That was hard. Not fighting one person, but having to do that multiple times, that was always hard.
Yep. Obviously, the sport combat in general has been great to you, Jimmy. I believe you met a very special person in your life going in this sport, right?
Yep.
What is the best thing that you've gotten out of this sport?
Wow. I've gotten a whole life out of it. I mean, I've really gotten a whole life out of, MMA. I mean, out of combat sports. I mean, I'm sitting here in my house. I mean, I paid for that with my commentary gig, and it's hard to even like narrow down to one. Everything I have in my life is because of combat sports. Everything. So, this path I've been on, which was my MMA career, and then Fight Quest, and then commentary. Basically, that is how my life has progressed in this direction, and it's gotten me everything I have, and every step has been kind of a step forward, and I've been very fortunate with that. I mean, it was M1, Affliction, Bellator, UFC, basically, Ninja Warrior in the middle of there. But I've always been able, fortunately, to kind of move up at the right time, and I've been so incredibly lucky and fortunate when it comes to that. But my whole life is because of combat sports. My whole life, everything I have, everything I'm known for, everything I do is because of that. So it's hard to even say one thing,
That's incredible, and I really can't touch on that enough because it sounds real easy, Jimmy, like you just kind of did, but you busted your butt. You worked so hard. You went through so much to get there, and you're there, and you're continuing to move forward. And I've got to tell you, I have nothing but the highest respect for you, brother. I really do. I love listening to you call the fights, and it's great to have someone that really knows what they're talking about. It's their passion. You see it. You feel it. It really is an honor for me, and I want to give everyone out there, the fans, I got to give them a shout out, man. Can we give your Twitter handle, Facebook, things like that?
No problem at all, man. Jimmy Smith MMA on Twitter, J Smith MMA on Instagram, and then Jimmy Smith MMA on Facebook. And I love hearing from the fans. So anytime I can interact with them, man, it's fun. I really enjoy it. They're great fans.
Yep. no doubt about it. And Jimmy, hats off, brother. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I know the fans are going to love it. I know I loved it. And, hey, I look forward to having you on again. One last thing.
You bet.
One last thing. Do you have any predictions? Now, this is tough in this sport. Any predictions when we start to speak about, and I've got to touch on it, but Ortega, Max Holloway is going to be just a crazy fight. Both guys tend to start a little slow. Everybody thought Holloway was just the big striker. Everyone thought Ortega was just this, basically the jiu-jitsu guy. We found out different. That is one hell of a fight that's going to be coming up. I mean, what do you think about that? Are you any? I don't want to give you predictions. Any thoughts on that fight?
Well, one thing, if you say, tell me how it's going to go. One thing I would really, really want to know: where is it? When is it? Because right now, if I'm Ortega, quick fight against Frankie Edgar, didn't really take much damage. You want to keep that momentum going. You want to get in there fast and kind of keep that juice that he's got going right now. So all those things to me factor in because right now Ortega's hot and momentum is a really big part of this sport. And he's a young kid, 27. He's undefeated, super confident of the biggest fight of his career, having finished a guy who had never been finished. So if you're Ortega, right now it's all about momentum. If you're Holloway, it's all about slowing this kid down, getting inside his head, hurting his confidence a little bit, and making him doubt himself. Because right now Ortega is not doubting anything because it's all working, man. This fight's all up here for both of these guys.
And that is a fact. You know what I hate to say, but I agree. I wish I could kind of go against you a little bit, but I don't. I agree 100%. Listen, Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time. So, hey, guys, for Jimmy Smith, for Modern Pugilist Entertainment, I'm Dan Cox, and we will see you next time.